Welcome to Daily Cyber episode number 270. I can't believe we're this far through that. I've done 270 episodes of Daily Cyber and I'm loving it. I'm going to see if I can reach over 1,000. That's my goal, right? Just to keep going. So today's episode is going to be really great. Depending on where you're watching, if you're watching Twitch, YouTube, LinkedIn, please comment, share your feedback. I've been having some great guests on my episodes, and we're talking about a lot of great things when it comes to cybersecurity, insurance, recovery, disaster recovery, instant response, hard drives, you name it. We've been covering a lot of great information, VCSO. So I want you guys to get the most value out of these episodes that we're talking to these experts and ask your questions. And then you can ask them live in the show while you have them here. Also, you can follow up with them after. So today's going to be an excellent episode. Going to have Martin Hinton, is award-winning journalist, international storyteller with a broad experience of writing, developing, editing, and producing high-profile business and political content that drives viewership for news organization. He has a proven ability to distill complex ideas into compelling, impactful narrative across various medias, including video, print, and digital. And that's where I saw him. I saw him on a few interviews, so I got really interested in his content. I know one of the things that he's an expert in, executive editor for Cyber Insurance News and Information. He's responsible for the content across all platforms. He hosts their podcasts. He does a lot of great information. So I want to really jump into his story and what he's doing. So grab a coffee, grab a tea, and let's hack at it. Welcome. How you doing, Martin?
I'm very well. I'm pleased to be here. I hope I can be of some use. You made me nervous when you described me as an expert.
An expert? You have more experience and knowledge in some of these areas, and from some of the research I know we talked about previously. As you guys all know, what I do is I talk to some of the guests ahead of time because they're really just to understand what we're going to talk about, some of the topics. And I know Martin went like, okay, here's a little bit of information I know, and he just went this way, left, right, and this information, the political landscape, what's going on with cyber warfare and all. Is like, okay, great. This is a lot of great content. Let's get you on the podcast, like the stream. Let's start talking about this information. So I'm really excited to have you here, Martin. I'm really excited to kind of talk about the depth of knowledge that you have and the visibility you have on what's going on in the industry.
Well, I'm glad to be here. I may be guilty of talking a little too much, and you didn't even buy me a bourbon. So here we are.
There you go. Right. So in saying that, like, kind of look at the landscape right now. What are like the top 3 concerns that you have in the cybersecurity landscape?
Well, I think that top 3. So I think that clarity about the risk on everything from the Fortune 500 level down to the small business level, the actual level of organization within cybercrime specifically, whether it's state-sponsored or in the case of the Marks and Spencer hack over in the UK, where they've arrested 4 people whose combined age isn't 80. And then broadly, this human condition we have to only worry about a problem after it becomes huge. And I feel like there are a lot of warning signs out there now about the nature of our cyber resilience on the nation state level and on the company level and even on the individual level that we have adopted a teenager mentality to. It won't happen to me. It'll happen to someone else. And I think that there is a lot of historical precedent for looking at those types of attitudes, and it should be a great concern.
So let's talk about that. Like, a lot of times you don't hear about, like, the day-to-day, if you're working for a company, you don't really talk about nation state, right? It's not kind of your conversation, because you're looking at threat actors going into the environment, endpoint protection. How do you get, protect the endpoint, phishing campaigns, things like that. Most of like these groups and organizations, but you don't look at like the global attack. And I think I love to kind of dive into that and how it affects organizations coming from outside in, right? Because a lot of times we don't think about, sometimes there's state action or, organizations, they're actually doing these attacks. It's not like this group of organizations like, hey, it's a bunch of threat actors, like you said, combined age of 80, in their basement, hoods on in the dark, going away, hacking an organization, right? Sometimes it is actually, government agencies.
Well, I mean, I think that the big thing I've talked to a few people recently about is the way that North Korea specifically has taken advantage of the remote work environment, where you get North Korean agents who are posing as people who are located, say, domestically in the case of America, and are in fact in North Korea. And what that allows for is, A, the very basic removal of currency into an economy that struggles sometimes for hard currency. And it's one of the reasons that cybercrime is appealing to the North Korean government is an issue of their economy. But also there's the matter of state secrets. And, I referenced the historical reality of it. The habit of nations like China and the Soviet Union and North Korea to do what we call reverse engineer technology, where they would, an example of World War II is a B-29, one of the more advanced aircraft that we had toward the end of World War II, made an emergency landing in the Soviet Union. And a few years later, they produced an aircraft that was almost identical in capability and in visual appearance. And I think that those are the sorts of things that are probably happening now. And I say that because people are people, right? We have the same habits of doing things. And that's an example where you have the ability of a nation to act in a, if you will, selfish way to draw money into their own economy, as you might say, with ransomware as a service, or you have it in a manner, and we know the North Koreans like to do this, to disrupt, right? They're disruptors. They're outside of the norms. I mean, we probably know more about the dark side of the moon than we do a lot of parts of North Korea. And I think it's important to keep that in mind as we think about what they might be willing to do. The answer to that question is look at what people have been willing to do in the past, and they're willing to do it digitally, online, however you want to put it.
Now, is there things that a normal organization would, can I identify that, hey, that's just some teenage group that's getting together versus that state organized group that's actually done that type of attack on my organization?
Well, I mean, again, the example I've been paying a lot of attention to, and I think is going to become a case study at places like the Harvard Business School for the nature of a cyber attack, the way it impacts you, and the sort of incident recovery environment, is the Marks and Spencer hack, right? This is a company that's over 100 years old, and the chairman, his name's Archie, who I can't remember his last name off the top of my head, but he testified before the UK Parliament, and first of all, it was almost a case study in crisis comms and the way he conducted himself. But the nature of that attack betrays the vulnerability that exists in an economy where we, take advantage of things like outsourcing and, managed service providers where, and the Clorox hack jumps into mind, and the lawsuit they just filed in their hack from a couple of years ago. He talked about how within that company, you had 50,000 employees at some level, both executives, retail employees, contractors in India, he mentioned specifically, 50,000 points of entry into his company that are, you get into one and you could be inside the whole thing. And as we know, you could get in, you could linger there for a while. The weird thing about the Marks and Spencer hack, and I think that's really interesting to keep in mind, is that we don't know the motivation of these four people, and it's only alleged that they're responsible for it. And the last I've said, the British legal environment's very, very closed. So there's not a lot of talking, and there's a lot of laws against that sort of thing. So there's very little detail like there might be in an American case. But if they're just there like kids once upon a time spray painted or threw rocks at a window, and right, the new disruptor for a kid to be a chaos agent with not the real motivation of money is to use their hacking skills or their online abilities to disrupt someone and be able to go, look what I did, that's alarming. And then you move into the sort of nation state side of things where you might disrupt, say, the NHS, which we've seen with allegations against the Russians in the UK as well, that you have the ability to do things like delay surgeries. And there was an incident in Germany where it seems quite clear that someone died as a result of a hack that affected the healthcare system, and someone didn't get the healthcare in the manner they needed in the time they needed, and it cost a life. So again, it's a broad spectrum, and I think that it's a bit like what kind of car you like. You can like used cars for $500, or you can buy a Bugatti. There's a lot of ways this can impact companies, and that's one of the real challenges you face with regard to preparing yourself. I did a piece for our website this morning, and we are in a dynamic environment for the insurance company, right? Fire, property, water damage. These are things with even centuries of understanding about what it means to insure a house on the Long Island outside New York City. With
Right.
cyber, it's evolving with a great pace. I mean, you throw in AI, which I'm sure we're going to get into, and I think that companies have to take a really, really adaptive, proactive approach to protecting themselves. I'll just wrap up. The chairman of Marks and Spencer's talked about how within the last year they had doubled their internal cybersecurity team to 80, and they had increased, I think he said 100%, their cyber insurance coverage to 300 million pounds, I think it is, but double check me on that. And
Right.
he was very, very blunt, and this is back to my point about it being a lesson in crisis comms. He's like, could we have done more? Absolutely. And I fear that's the reality companies face now, is that you really do face an unknown that is a lot like warfare, where there's a real chaos agent at play, where any plan you might have only survives first contact with the enemy, is the old saying in the military. I used to do a lot of military history documentaries, so I come at this with that sort of mindset historically. And I feel like, not wanting to sound like doomsday-ish, the level of understanding of that, even at Fortune 500 companies at the board level, is disconnected.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, I think you brought up a good point, is that the landscape, the attack surface has changed. When you have 1,000, 2,000, 15,000 employees that are out of your environment, because a lot of these companies and organizations create these security infrastructures. You're behind a firewall. You have endpoint protection on your endpoint. We have email filtering. We have, proxies in place that you're doing filter. Like, all this stuff is in looking at the traffic, looking at how to protect the organization. But then you're at home on your home network.
Yeah, I mean, so you touch on something that is a real core of it for me, right? We talk about technology and all the layers of technology we can in place. At the end of the day, human beings are essential to all this stuff, and we know that human beings are the great fallibility, right? We create the most problems. We reuse passwords. We use personal devices. We go outside our company's AI policy and create vulnerabilities there, even if it's just for IP type stuff. So I think that when you look at, I think about it from the cyber insurance world, when you want to be policy compliant, it's like, oh, does every employee do cybersecurity training of this nature every 6 months or 12 months or whatever the policy requires? And
Right.
that is a real bare minimum. And you look at the way that the human brain works and the way companies are becoming more efficient, that creates a huge stress on employees. And what we know is that they are going to find ways, because human beings always find a way to survive, to maintain their workload and achieve their tasks. And if that means they step outside the rules, or they do things they aren't supposed to in the cybersecurity world, because they have a task to achieve that they need to by Friday at 5 o'clock, or they're going to work late, or their boss is going to yell at them, they are going to do this. So having a realistic sort of understanding of how, moving, say, your cybersecurity help desk or your help desk outside of your company and making it a sort of, cheaper thing to do, which is, again, I'm not opposed to that sort of thing. There are consequences to this, and the consequences can be quite extraordinary in a monetary sense. One of the things that I've looked at a lot lately is and I had a conversation with someone who was saying that they were surprised with this. The Fortune 500 companies where, the boards and the CISOs don't really communicate, and the boards are looking at all the real problems that exist in a legacy sense. And this problem is a relatively new one. And I have to say, it's a very, very hard problem to understand. I've only been at this cybersecurity and cyber insurance journalism for a couple of years, but I've worked in other really, really complicated aspects of technology and understanding military movements and history and how weapons integrate and work together in a combined arms style battlefield. And there is a real complexity to it that is betrayed by all the acronyms that exist and the lingo that exists. I mean, one that I was thinking about in preparation for this is the phrase the tech stack, right? And I always think, when I see that, I think of piles of servers and a literal stack. And I think that when you're an everyday person, maybe in the accounting department, or even a chief legal officer at a big corporation, your mind might not be geared to instantly understanding what that means. And those barriers of communication are a problem, and they're also something that can be taken advantage of by bad actors. And again, back to the human element, we know people will go where value exists and seek to steal it. That's not a new thing. And we are moving all of these things we value into a digital space. All of the processes that make companies so efficient in the digital age, like email is a simple example, into a digital space. And the that's a brilliant thing, and it's made for a global economy, and the friction that's been removed from all sorts of things that existed back when you have to FedEx documents, and even fax machines that I started out with when I started my career are gone. Good. Problems come with every change, and I think that that's something that I fear people don't quite comprehend. And again, it comes back to A, it's complicated, and B, there is a real, again, teenager mentality that exists, even us old guys, that it won't happen to me. It'll happen to someone else. It'll happen to a big company, or it'll happen to someone with, tons of crypto, and the wallet will be hacked, whatever it might be.
Right. And I think that's a good point. I mean, you have to be self-aware. And I think it's hard because when you're working with organizations, they've got their day-to-day functions and their business and their process and what they're focused on. They're not focused on security. Security is a secondary thought. I mean, if I'm accounts payable, accounts receivable person, I'm a manufacturer, I'm looking at production, I'm doing all that, I'm not thinking security first. It's not my job, right? My job is to do what my process I need to do, my task. That's where I'm focused on. And how can I be the most efficient? Because there's only 7.5 hours a day. I got to get my work done. I got to get all my tasks, and then I got to go the next day and continue that workload, right? And keep going. So you don't really think of, okay, well, is the system secure? How do you do it? Is my password complex? You're not thinking that every single day, every single hour. Now, security people, hell yeah, we're doing that every single day. We're talking about it, right? We're living it. But I think what happened was the day-to-day employee that's going through this, it's a secondary thought because they have to be a subject matter experts in their position.
You make a really, really good point. I mean, I think that again, if you're trying to internally communicate, let's say you're the HR department or you're in internal comms in a company, the way to emphasize this for your employees is that every one of you is part of our cybersecurity protocol. The way you conduct yourself, you could be the reason the door opens. And I say that with some trepidation because one of the things I dislike is that when there's a hack and it's blamed on a help desk employee who inadvertently resets a password because there's an AI deepfake, right? This is one of the few crimes where it seems it's okay still to blame the victim. And I think that that's a mindset we need to get away from because what happens is people, I mean, there are actually psychological studies of people who are responsible for hacks and their productivity declines and if it's a department. But I think that the example I use, and again, back to my history world, is September 11th, right? After September 11th, every single police officer in America had to suddenly think domestic terrorism or international terrorism as a function of their day-to-day job. That didn't replace some existing responsibility like traffic accidents or burglary investigations or homicide investigations. It was a whole new piece of pie that they had to find a way to insert into an already complete pie. And I think that when you consider that reality, when you combine it with all the existing day-to-day pressures of any given job to do your specific important role, that is, it's a burden, but it's an important burden to make them realize matters. And I think leaders of good quality recognize that if you do this, regardless of whether people should bootstrap it and just suck it up and get their jobs done and also do this new thing, again, back to people, we are all just flesh and blood. And whether it's a CISO or a board member who is, kind of vaguely interested or not really sure about this stuff, so they pretend they don't really know, or it's someone lowly in the environment where they're just trying to make it and they want to impress people, so they slip something into ChatGPT or whatever it might be, or they do something on their personal device because it's a weekend, but they want to get ahead of things. These are the little things that, as we know, create huge vulnerability for companies of every size.
Right. And I think that's where you look at controls. So the controls are wrapped around employees to help to create a more secure environment. You have endpoint protection on the actual devices, laptops, desktops, whatever. So if there is malware, they did click on something by accident, at least you're hopefully that's not a 0 day that's going to detect it. It's going to stop it, right? It's going to alert, it's going to quarantine, kill and quarantine that malware. If it's a phishing campaign, you're hoping you have like Mimecast or some email filtering that's stopping that. Like you're having these technical controls around employees to create a secure environment because, to your point, and I'm going to add that kind of stress component, people are overwhelmed. People are stressed. They're busy. They're not thinking about, do I click on this link? Someone sent me an invoice. I'm an accounts payable person. Somebody sent me a PDF that's an invoice. I'm going to click on it. They don't think, hold on, is that actually a valid invoice? Am I waiting for this document? They don't go through that due diligence. Do I sandbox that and put an area where I can scan first before I open up? Some companies are doing that, but I'd say the average are not.
Well, I mean, you touch on something really, really clever, and we see this right before. I mean, I did a report in the last 6 months, right before the Lunar New Year. There's a spike in hacks because people are busy. Come to the holiday season where people are thinking about, the Christmas party or the trip they're taking to somewhere sunny over the New Year. They're rushing to get work done before they take 10 days off or a week off. We know that there is a high level of sophistication and order to cybercrime. And when you think about like let's take this to the behavioral psychology side of thing and the way legitimate companies use what we know about how the human brain works, and they use it to sell products or market to you or to separate you from your money, right?
Right.
All of that information is available to organized crime and cyber criminals, and they're using it just as effectively. I mean, I think that is, again, something to keep in mind. This is not, I mean, you made reference to if you ask ChatGPT for an image of a hacker, it comes back with someone with a hood on in their mom's basement eating Hot Pockets. And I think that betrays a level of simplicity and a lack of order that in fact exists. So we have this weird dichotomy where it's the nation state backed reality, but it's also 17-year-olds who are sitting at home. And the irony being, it might be the case that that's true. And I think that that's what makes, from a cyber insurance point of view, assessing risk so difficult. And also from a cybersecurity point of view, you're like, there's a phrase in espionage, cover for action, cover for status. Like, do they deserve to be here? Should they be here? Do they look like they belong? All these little things. And what we know is that it is very, very easy. I did a podcast, one of our podcasts recently, and it was with someone who worked at a Fortune 5 company, and they would do this massive tech convention. And their understanding of how many fake Wi-Fi networks got set up during the convention so people could potentially get into devices and the information on those devices extended to setting up Wi-Fi network monitors weeks before the convention, during the convention, and after, so they could see which ones went away and came back during the convention. So Starbucks, Star One is not the actual Starbucks, but the vast majority of people are not going to do this. They're not going to think like that. I got to get online. I got to check my email. Oh, it's whatever it might be. So you throw in again, like the skimmers that exist on ATMs and the way that sort of, juice jacking is the phrase I've heard used, where at an airport lounge, you're like, oh, I forgot my charger. I better plug it into this. The level of sophistication and vulnerability we create as a function of how much friction we've removed through the digital sort of use of devices to, again, make companies more efficient, more profitable, all very good things, comes at a price. And I feel like our understanding of that price and that risk is trailing the upside that it's created in a way that makes us think, oh, we'll just fix that problem when it happens. And again, that's a human condition. It's not something new. And the historical analogy I think I used when we spoke before this is that I would liken this to the influence air power as a tool of war had prior to World War II. And there's a very, very famous example that I can get into if you want. But that idea that we have now introduced this capacity where you have the ability not to put spies ashore off Long Island like the Nazis did during World War II. That spy can come in as they like. They can exist. The AT&T hack is an example where they know what phone numbers are being monitored as a result of federal warrants. So now they know, okay, well, they're watching that number that we used to communicate with that asset. These are huge problems that AI now allows people to take all of this data and actually make sense of it. So I think that there is sort of a very dangerous sort of growing reality to this. Again, not just on the nation state level, but on the disruptive nature. If you want to win a war now, you destroy someone's economy. You don't have to bomb their cities. And I think that that's something that we should probably be paying way more attention to. Some countries are better than others. I wouldn't have a favorite. I like the UK in some respects. They've just talked about banning ransomware, or I think they are doing it. I forget the exact details in this moment of live television or internet for critical infrastructure and public utilities. I think it is. So I think that idea that we need to report this data, that there was a recent report out of why there's so many cyber attacks in Australia, and the lead of the article said, well, there's a much higher reporting requirement. We just know about them because people have to say that happened. And I think that that's another level. Like, we need that information to become more readily available, and not at the risk of companies, because again, that comes back to blaming and punishing the victim for being the victim of a crime that is organized and sophisticated and truly hard to detect at times.
No, it totally makes sense. And I think the one challenge I think I see right now is when government agencies and countries are trying to ban ransomware, Well, it doesn't mean they're stopping. They're just affecting the organizations that are actually being affected by ransomware.
Yeah, well, I mean, listen, I mean, you catch me out, because I don't mean to suggest that government is the solution. I mean, I think it could be, but I think when you look at the situation, we probably are in a situation where we need some sort of global understanding of what to do, because there are no borders with this situation, right? You can be anywhere on the planet. I mean, I think back to the two men in Sudan who've been indicted by the Department of Justice here for the cyber attack that they conducted on Israel's internal digital alert system prior to the October 7th attack 2 years ago, where it delayed the warnings, and that almost certainly led to increased death and suffering, right? So this is, the example I would use there is that you don't prep the beach like it's Normandy anymore. You turn off their lights. The example I would use for critical infrastructure is if you could imagine the power going out on the West Coast from Washington down to Southern California, and then 24 hours later, China invaded a portion of Taiwan, I think it'd be very, very hard for the American government to get Americans to care about it if they were still having trouble charging their phones and cars and all the other things that we rely on. And I think that those are the kinds of mindsets that certainly exist in some quarters. And there are tons of very smart people, way more intelligent and informed than me, talking about this. But I feel like that understanding about the threat that exists deserves to be more democratized, because it does affect all of us.
No, I think also too, there has to be a global extradition law and legalities, because if I'm in Canada and someone from Russia hacks a Canadian company, there's nothing you can do legally. Like there's absolutely nothing you can do. Like for me, it would be the RCMP, equivalent to the FBI, can't go after them. Like I remember going through an incident where the actual, organization, the CEO and the C-suite were saying, how can we get these people criminally charged? And I remember the council said, there's nothing you can do.
No, right? and that makes a great point when it comes to assessing blame and finding the responsible party. And this is another huge part of the problem, where you have nations that, listen, I mean, the truth of the matter is this kind of thing, back to my historical perspective, this sort of thing has always gone on. So I don't want to sound like the sky is falling and we're dealing with a human condition that doesn't matter. I just feel like we're delaying or addressing it in a manner that creates, potentially significant problems. And well, to be fair, the problems are already quite significant, but they could be greater than they are. And this is where you want to be sophisticated, right? Because the enemies and the criminals are sophisticated, right? They don't want to steal everything. They want to keep you alive so they can steal from you again, right? Like you break into a house, you don't want to kill the homeowners, because then all the law enforcement in the world comes down on you. You just steal stuff. And I think that that's something to keep in mind about the idea that there is a real sophistication and order to the criminal side of this that deserve to be. I mean, you have to respect your enemy. You have to, from dating back to the art of war type of analogy, don't underestimate your enemy. And I think that the ChatGPT teenager in a hoodie hacker image betrays that sort of possibility for some people.
And there, like you said, there is organized crime. I mean, it was interesting. I remember talking to someone that was in the criminal element, I'll say that, when I was working full-time security, like physical security. And I remember them coming in and saying, I can do like X, Y, and Z. And then I know I will either, one, it'll be a lesser charge, I won't get charged, or I might have a smaller sentence, and then the fine's gonna be there. So they know the legal system. And so they know how to work around it or work through it in that process. So when you look at these cyber criminals, a lot of them know what they can and can't get away with, and how far they can push. And as an organization, and again, you mentioned that like ransomware as a service. Some people don't know this. People coming into the industry, some people do it who have years of experience in this. But there's like hotlines, call centers, support lines. It is a company. Like it's not like you said where it's 5 guys globally in a basement that's connected through the dark web in a chat saying, hey, let's try this together. They actually have an organization that they've created, like almost like a business model and an org chart of how they work.
Yeah. Well, when you started, what you said reminded me, remember the movie Heat with De Niro and Al Pacino, and they're armed robbers and a cop, and it's this brilliant Michael Mann film. In the very beginning, one of the bad guys, quote unquote, shoots an armored car guard. and then they kill the other two because the punishment for killing one is the same as punishment for killing all three, and we may as well not have any witnesses on the other side, right? So that level of understanding exists in this space, and I think that is, again, something that like one of the things that examples someone gave me recently was that a lot of the ransomware companies, before they hack you and send you a ransomware note, they'll hack your insurance company and see what your ransomware coverage is, so they know exactly what price point you can be pressed to, right? So this is like reading your enemy's playbook before the game starts. It's depending on which football team in America you like, you could make an analogy to certain teams. I won't get into that mess, but this is the kind of thing that it happens. And I mentioned the football analogy and the sort of sending a drone up over someone's practices before the Super Bowl, because this is just a human thing. So again, when it comes to protecting yourself against it, the tech is new, and there are a lot of really, really cool things you can do. But the human element is the one that I keep coming back to, is the one that needs to be emboldened to remember that they matter. They can be involved in the security. They need to be involved in the security, and the way they conduct themselves is really, really important. And again, I think that when you look at things that work with regard to teaching cybersecurity in companies, we know gamification works, right? Turn it into a game, make it fun, make it something that has real world analogies. And this isn't, again, these are not new concepts. In sports and in warfare, we practice like we plan or intend to play. And I think that idea for prepping for incident response at the corporate level, that should exist at every corporation, and it doesn't, right? The idea that on a Sunday, just after New Year's, when you've got 2 more days off before the work week begins, you have a drill where your company's servers do not work and no one can return a product to your company, right? What do we do? Because that's exactly when enemies attack, not just cyber enemies, all enemies. They attack where and when they expect you to least expect it. And again, these mindsets, this sort of mindset of a military idea and a military strategy is, again, all being adopted by these cyber criminals. The other point I'd like to make, and I haven't seen anything, so this is purely Martin speculation, the risk of cybercrime, to what you were just saying, is lower from a physical point of view, right? If you're going to steal something like a piece of art or break into a house or rob a bank, there is physical risk. And we know that when you have that moment of physical risk, that's when vulnerability exists. If you're an organized crime network, you're like, why would I bother moving, this and that when I can just move my criminal organization and make it digital and do this as a digital operation and secure myself in a country without extradition or without a treaty, or where I'm completely safe. You pay a bit of a kickback to whatever government or dictator it is that's happy to let you hang around, and you are in a situation where you can make much more money without nearly the level of risk to yourself. And I think, again, that's where you should don't underestimate your foe. And I think that sometimes people tend to, right? And I think that that's something really important that particularly large companies need to keep in mind. The way they've sort of, supply chain so much of their technical side. Healthcare is a good example in America, where you have all of these interconnected, and we hear about them because of HIPAA, but you have all these interconnected realities, whether it's the hospital that has 15 MRI facilities that they're connected to digitally, so people don't have to come into the actual hospital to get an MRI. I say this because this is one of the data breach notices I've gotten in the last 2 years, and I called them up. I said, well, do we get credit monitoring? And they didn't have any plan to cover any of that sort of thing in post the data breach that they suffered, which again is something incredibly naive for a company of this scale and a major healthcare organization to have got. And I put the blame on the people in charge. Whatever the large healthcare provider is, how do you not know the protocols and the coverage that the vendors you use, if you will, are using their security protocols? That's another thing that you cybersecurity is just security, right? That's another mindset that I think people need to their house, and you're the last one on a Friday to leave. You turn the lights out and you lock the door. If the second lock on the lock is kind of rusty and it never really closes quite right, so people stop using it, well, there's your second factor of authentication gone, right? Like, this is the mindset you need to have. You wouldn't leave your office building and the guard doesn't lock up and jimmy the door, make sure it's locked securely at the end of the day. The guard walks through the entire office and looks in offices to make sure there's no one around lingering for nighttime when they come out and steal 10 laptops. That's literally what happens in Midtown offices with regard to internal theft problems. And I think that sort of physical security mindset is something that could be really, really useful helping again, back to the individuals and the employees that may not think this is part of their role and their responsibility to adopt, to think, oh, you know what? Okay, you don't do that. I don't use public Wi-Fi. I don't leave my office door unlocked because the lock's kind of broken and it's annoying to get in sometimes. That sort of thing.
So now we have a question from one of the communities. Are you saying that in your real world experience that criminals organizations moving to different countries?
No, so I'll be very careful. I don't know that. And that's why I said that this is like when you
your speculation, right? Kind of.
Yeah, this is purely like, listen, there's no such thing as hindsight from before, right? So the idea that I just thinking about the way you evolve. And what made me think of it is your point about the fact that there are safe havens for this kind of behavior, and you could be involved in that safe haven and exist in that safe haven in a digital way that creates enormous layers of protection for the risk of, say, legal punishment. So again, I think that if you were to get a treaty between, say, the UK and America on some of this, or even the EU and states between some of this, okay, all right, fine, I'll move to Morocco, or not to single out Morocco, but any other country that isn't a function of that treaty. And I think that that's where you get a situation where, again, look at the countries that are outside Interpol, for example, right? That idea that there's adaptability, and every plan only survives first contact, right? And so when you make a change and you create a new policy and a new law designed to impact the threat you face, the threat will adapt to that. Maybe it doesn't adapt well because the change is really good, but the idea that adaptation isn't existing and that people are like, well, you know what, let's move away from this crime. And it's not unlike, bootleggers moved into legal alcohol, like Ernest and Julia Gallo is my favorite example. They were huge bootleggers prior to the end of prohibition in the States. And now I think the last time I looked, they sell about $6 billion worth of legal liquor products a year. But they started out in that environment. And I think that's, when I think about adaptation and the nature of human beings being consistent over time, that's kind of what I'm thinking about. So I hope that answers the question. But no, I don't have any specific examples of that happening off the top of my head. I just, again, we're really, really smart. Humans are incredibly good at surviving, and some of us are up to no good. So,
well, I would take into consideration to answer that question, to kind of give another perspective, is if you look at where the threat actors are coming from, so you look at these threat reports and information, and you see the countries they're coming from, it kind of tells you that story of where they're at. Like, you don't see a lot of threat actors. I mean, you do see some, but again, it's very rare that you see big organization groups coming from US, from Canada, right? Because again, they're attacking American companies. You'll see them coming from Mexico. You see them coming from the Middle East. You see them come from like India and the Philippines and things along that. See them coming from Russia, like all those other countries. So you kind of go, okay, if you kind of you track the data, you kind of go, it does make sense that if they're going to create an organization, they're probably going to do it in one of these areas where a lot of these threat actors, build out their business. And I mean, you and I know, and people watching this, you watch where people create their companies and organizations. Valid companies create their organizations for tax breaks, right? You look at, all the Caribbean islands and things along that line where they have tax shelters, right? So just like the criminals know how to get around systems and legalities and all that, so do certain business people. I remember Donald Trump. Yeah, he was debating with Hillary Clinton about taxes, right? Him paying taxes. Yep. And she's like, yeah, he hasn't paid taxes. He hasn't done that. And it's like, you set up the system. If you wanted change, you could have done that. Your friends do the same thing I'm doing. I'm now more honest about it.
Now, you mentioned, for example, the Philippines, right? A place I've been to a couple of times, beautiful place. But we offshore all these call centers there. So the conduit already exists. The idea that you would, get a call from someone who sounds like they're from another country is not sort of a foreign thing anymore. So there are all these sort of camouflages that you can use. And I think that again is a real problem. I mean, one of the things we haven't touched on is the deepfake reality. And in my spare time, I write a Substack, and I wrote a piece that's called "A Myriad of Manufactured Moments." And the basic gist of it is that you can't trust anything you see on your screen. And that's not to say everything you see on your screen is sinister or created to fool you, but it's not reality. And I think that if you move that into a really dark space where you've got people who are looking to try and steal, the ability to fake the sounds of voices and that sort of thing is really, really severe now. And again, Cybercriminals have been doing just fine without AI, so I'm a little concerned that when we start to fix some of the problems they have and AI improves, that there are going to be ways that I can't think of that they adopt its use. But I think that idea that AI has made so many legitimate businesses or increased the efficiency in so many legitimate business processes, the idea that that can't exist in an illegitimate space is just, it's naive to think like that. And again, I think that, this is where every company and every individual needs to assess this in a way that exists, not unlike looking both ways when you cross the street, right? Like that cyber resilience is the new, don't get hit by the bus.
Right, 100%. And then going to that, because I know we got about maybe 15 minutes left. Let's talk about like the AI technology. What's your viewpoint on how AI is going right now? I know you kind of had some nuggets here and there, but what's your concern about AI technology in our landscape?
My concern is it's making people who don't know enough yet lazy and not, again, it's brilliant and it's incredibly useful for all sorts of things. My concern is that it has the capacity for scaling danger. So these obscure things like 160 million logon credentials were hacked in this, 60 million here, 35 million there. That information, like when you hear that, you're like, well, what does that mean to me? And why do I care? And one of the examples that I've been given recently is that all of that information can be brought together in one space, and they can see Martin Hinton's last 35 passwords for the 35 websites that data was breached and taken from, right? And they see a pattern where they see my two kids and a birth year and then an asterisk. And the AI can then take that and come up with the next 10 combinations of password that I'm inclined to use, because I always default to Betty 1987 69, right? And that is a very, very simple example of how all of that data can be taken incredibly quickly and used to create, once upon a time, you might even equate that to a brute force style attack, but it's not, right? If you have to enter the password like 3 or 4 times, and you get in, I think that's where we see a problem with AI. I think, one of the things that I concern myself with is, and we see this now online in social media in a fun way, is video that is not real, stuff that is not legitimate. And It is sometimes it's all created for likes and attention. Like the scarcest commodity of our time is human attention. It's also the most valuable. And I think that if you're making cat videos and cuddling a dog and it's not real, but someone who's less sophisticated or doesn't see the 6th finger on the hand of the person and all these things that we're told to look for, this is the beginning, right? So we are at the Model T Ford era of AI. One of the great inventions of the industrial age was the steam engine. And there's a really, really good book about how the steam engine powered the industrial age. But what really, really made it effective and what made the industrial age boom as a function of its ability to do the labor and create the energy that made industry work were the tiny little tweaks and inventions that improved it for a specific process or a specific industry. And I think AI is in that same space, right? It's almost like AI right now, we pulled a 50-ton piece of gold out of the ground, but if we can turn it into statues, it's worth 10 times as much as it is now. And I feel like we're in the raw commodity days of AI. And ChatGPT just introduced the virtually agentic is, I guess, what they call it. I forget exactly how they marketed it, but this idea that you can give it a task, it goes off, it works in the background, and when it gets to the end of that, you go back and you treat it like a junior employee, and you say, oh, that's pretty good, but now try this and do that a little differently. Again, I think that idea that we are in a position to take this initial idea, as amazing as it is and as revolutionary as it is for anyone who's paying attention, I really think it's the beginning. And I mean, the great example everyone uses is the hack involving an employee at a Hong Kong organization that inadvertently wired, I think it's $25 million. And It was a deepfake video. But the truth of the matter is, with AI, you could do that with, I don't know, $1,000 times 10,000, right? You can scale it. There was a brilliant is the word, ATM hack recently, where they organized people to go to these ATMs in a moment when they would give out 10 times what the withdrawal amount was, and people just disappeared. And I think that idea that you can scale this, and there are always going to be people who are willing to do the physical part of the crime. So that's my take on AI very broadly, is that if you're worried about it now, just wait. I think that and that's where, back to our point earlier about some sort of broader international treaty, not unlike you would have had about nuclear arms proliferation, AI proliferation needs a global understanding of what's the right way to use it, what's the legitimate way to use it. And for me personally, the very important thing is that whatever AI does, there needs to be a human responsible for it, whether it's a legitimate use or not. You have to be able to draw it back to a person. And I think
Right.
that, whether it's someone using AI to generate or help write a term paper, you may not be the writer, but now you're the author, if you will. That distinction, as subtle as it might be, that's another thing that I think becomes really, really important. So again, if you buckle up, I guess, to put it in a simple phrase.
Well, I think the other challenge too is like going on both sides. I'm going to kind of call it white hat, like black hat. White hat's kind of like the average employees trying to look at, how do I write templates? How do I do that? They kind of get a prompt going and they get that going, and then it helps them do it in half the time, right? Because a lot of that boilerplate information that you'd have to write out and you have to take your time to do it, it can fill that in, and then you just have to modify it. So kind of using that. But then you look at, if they have some sort of system or process they want to get ChatGPT to evaluate and give them a recommendation, how to change, how to modify, how to do that. Like you're talking about those prompts and the kind of the growth of AI, of building on the last prompt. Now you go on the black hat side, it's so different and then I've heard stories where people were saying, like, I'm writing a book, because again, AI has some barriers that you can't say, hey, I want to hack this company, show me how to do it. But they've gone like, hey, I want to write this book about how I'd hack company ABC. The company has this, this, and this. Tell me how you do it in this story. And all of a sudden it starts to talk through, well, I would do this, 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 and this. I would look at that. I would do that. And then how would you do that? And what system would you use? And all of a sudden it gives them like a roadmap, right? A walkthrough of, here's how you do it. Well,
Yeah.
all that research threat actors have been doing on their own, doing reconnaissance on the organization, doing reconnaissance of like the external like firewalls and their ISP and all that. But now it's doing it all through ChatGPT, which it can do it in minutes. So all that reconnaissance and information and threat intelligence they get it from ChatGPT, and then they go and now they do their activity.
Yeah. I mean, you make a really good point. For all the barriers you might put in, and I suspect anyone who's used it's seen that they're not perfect. The nature of it right now, whether it's ChatGPT or any of the others, is earnest child. It wants to please. It wants to satisfy the request. And that's where a lot of everyone says hallucinations, and mistakes is what they are. But that's where a lot of that comes from, where it wants to please. And we see this advice about how to write the prompt so that you navigate that reality of it. But it's in the satisfying business, pardon me. And I think that's something to keep in mind, right? It wants to satisfy. So again, if you can write the prompt in a way that skirts that barrier, it's not, make it a Tom Clancy novel, please. And I think that's where you get the scenario that you're talking about. And it's, again, back to the sophistication. There are ways to make this happen that are there for the taking. And you don't need to be anything more than a motivated criminal to navigate it.
100%. Now we've got about 5 minutes left. Any last closing remarks? Anything you'd like the audience to know?
Yeah, one of the things that in this environment, I try to be direct, and I hope that I don't want to sound hyperbolic, because I do believe the threat is real. So I'm not imagining it. I'm not trying to sell a product. I'm not being sponsored by anyone or any of that sort of thing.
So let me put it this way, Martin. I wouldn't have a job if this threat wasn't real.
Yeah, well, there you go, right? But right. I think that what I would encourage people to do is look for ways to make this something that is. The truth is, we can solve this problem. Human beings are brilliant, right? These sorts of problems have already existed, and I feel like I've touched on that specifically because I don't want to scare people into thinking that they have to move into some Luddite reality, But I do think that there is this very real threat that we're being warned about. The example I mentioned earlier is based on Pearl Harbor. In 1926, a man in the U.S. Army went on a tour. Billy Mitchell was his name. He went on a tour of the Asian Rim. He came back, and in 1926, he wrote a report saying the next great war will begin when the Japanese commit a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor at 7:30 on a Sunday morning, and a few hours later they attack our bases in the Philippines. And the attack happened at about 7:48 or 7:53 because the Japanese fleet was a little behind schedule, right? So these warning signs are there. And if we take the need to be prescient and pay attention, we build the guardrails up, we investigate solutions, we combine arms from the tech side to the human side, the training side. We can lean into this problem and we can prepare for it like you could prepare for any type of event, whether it be a big party or a speech you're giving or a football game or whatever you might be doing. The ability to practice so that when the event happens, it is the damage is mitigated. The recovery time is less. The resources like the ones you provide exist now, and I just would encourage people to not think that this isn't real, but at the same time, don't feel like you need to put your head in the sand and say goodbye to your phone and the internet and all that sort of thing, because this is a common thing, right? Change, evolution is good and bad. There are things that come with, whether it's technology or anything else, that are pluses and minuses. And I think it's quite clear that technology, the digital environment is a huge plus for humanity. And I think that what we need to do is be mindful of that in those scenarios, there are always downsides, and we just need to guard against them and be prepared. And when things happen, have a plan. That's the classic plan for crisis management, is to have a plan. It will never be a perfect plan, but something. When this happens, who do you call? What do you do? If you realize you've been hacked and you're a junior employee, who do you call first? Those sorts of things. And I think that's something to keep in mind. Don't lose hope.
Right. No, it's good. Now, best way to contact you, I got your LinkedIn here.
Great.
People want to reach out to you.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a podcast that I host, and we're always looking for guests. One of the things that we love to do is, because this is such a new topic and we want to try and make it, particularly in our case, accessible to small and medium-sized business owners that can generally sometimes feel completely detached from this. So if that's an area of interest to people and they're interested in reaching that audience, it's one we're interested in reaching as well. So yeah, please do get in touch through LinkedIn, and I'll give you my email and we can have a chat. And again, because I'm a journalist, I'm a TV producer. This is a fascinating topic that I think that is more interesting than people realize.
And then you have your website, cyberinsurancenews.org. So if you guys want to check that out, go by. Again, it's cyberinsurancenews.org. You guys can check out just some of the articles, the information that Martin has on his site. So it's really good, really great information. So thank you so much, Martin. It was great having you on the show.
Well, it's been my pleasure. I feel like I said a lot. I hope at least some of it was useful.
Oh, I'm sure it was. And I'm sure we're going to get lots of questions. I'm sure people are going to follow you, especially looking at state nation attacks and things like that. And how do you protect yourself? I think that's a big topic and a lot of conversation around that right now.
Yeah, there is port security. There's another one, maritime cybersecurity. We didn't even touch on that. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
All right. Take care. Enjoy.
Well, what a great interview. I mean, I think you guys hopefully got a lot of great information from that. I know we covered so much different topics, especially when you state nation attackers, looking at, how to protect organizations, businesses, and then looking at, as we go through, just the different areas of cybersecurity and just a different perspective of how you look at laws, legalities, different countries, look at AI technologies, and just the good side of it, and also the question and the concern around it is it really something that we should be concerned about? And we always talk about on the show is do your due diligence. I always talk about, if you're looking at an AI technology or a solution, do your due diligence, right? Make sure that you understand where the data is flowing. Make sure that you understand the security, in the environment. Make sure you understand, how they're using that technology for, collecting data and information. If it's siloed to yourself and you have it in your environment, it's sandbox, perfect. But if it's a shared, AI technology that you and the partner that you're working with, that you're getting the AI technology, how do they use it? How they go through their due diligence? What are they using? Is the data, encrypted at rest in motion? Is it, metadata? Is it enumerated? All these different things. Is it masked? So they can't, if a threat actor ever gets into that organization that has that AI technology and your data, can they get access to your data? Can they get access to your confidential information? So a lot of great, topics, a lot of great things that we covered. And I love that you guys come out day in and day after. Please share these with your family, your friends, get them up to date, because I want to make sure that we're constantly having these conversations about cybersecurity and what's going on in the industry. So that's it for today's episode. Don't forget, software is hackable, being connected is vulnerable. I'll see you next Daily Cyber.